Good afternoon. I'm Danica Weepa, the Director of Marketing at RKL Solutions. Thank you for joining us today. Today's session will be on Sage Sales Tax for Manufacturers and Distributors. We've partnered with Avalara to deliver you this presentation. A couple of housekeeping items. The session today will be recorded should you want to rewatch or share it. The recording will be posted on RKL's YouTube site. Also, all lines will be muted and we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. Otherwise, you can submit a question anytime via the Q&A chat feature. If the screen is too small, use double arrows or magnifying glass above the presentation window to enlarge your screen. And today, we have Tom Beemler from Avalara. He will be our presenter. Tom is a founding Avalara employee, and he has worked in various capacities in channel development, API, connector, and e-commerce sales, customer loyalty, and strategic alliances. Tom works closely with RKL and clients to maximize your investment in the Sage Tax solution, and your Sage product. Also, your RKL account reps are Gia Lane on the East Coast and Mike Scher on the West Coast. Please don't hesitate to contact them should you have any questions regarding your Sage solution or how Avalara can fit in with it. So without delay, let's get started, Tom.
Well, thanks, Danica. I'm real happy to be here today. I guess that was a great introduction. There's not much more that I can say about myself, except that over the 13 years that I've been with Avalara, I've worked with all kinds of different companies of all sizes and all industries. I've worked with their CFOs, with tax managers, IT directors, and their users. And I'm looking forward to trying to share some of the insights that I've picked up along the way. We're going to spend most of our time today looking in the software itself. I don't want to bore you with a lot of PowerPoint, but there are a few things that we need to do. I'd like to kind of set the stage. So we'll talk a little bit about some key trends that are going on in the sales tax industry, the environment, and some of the implications they might have for the companies on the line, and how we believe we can help manufacturers and distributors. Again, we're going to spend most of the time looking at the software itself. But let's start talking about the market. I often run into some pretty significant misinformation that actually keeps a lot of businesses from being truly compliant. What many manufacturers and distributors I talk to say is that they don't need to worry about sales tax compliance, right? Well, excuse me, but would it surprise you to learn that manufacturers and distributors are in one of the highest risk groups for state sales tax audit? There's a number of reasons for that. One is just the number of exempt sales you handle. Exempt sales are targeted because it's hard to prove the exemption. Sometimes paper gets lost. Sometimes you might overlook a Nexus obligation. It's a pretty error-prone environment. And there's a major audit risk. Think of it this way. Let's say I'm a state auditor and I have a choice of what company I'm going to audit. There's a retail shop on the corner of Main Street I can go in and look at, or there's a manufacturer or distributor. Well, I know if I go into the retail shop, they might have missed the most recent tax rate change, so maybe they're charging 0.1% or 0.25% lower than they should be. So after the audit, I'm only going to get maybe 0.1% or 0.25% of what all the transaction and the revenues would be. But if I audit the distribution business, I can find that maybe they have invalid exemption certificates or they haven't been paying use tax, so I would get to recoup the entire rate for all of the transactions. Now, in both scenarios, you're going to be assessed fines and penalties for noncompliance, but which one do you think the auditor is going to go after first? I mean, probably the manufacturer and the distribution firm, because there's potentially a much bigger payoff. So there's a lot of issues to address when you're talking about transactional taxes. First, you need to get the calculation right. Now, that sounds easy, but there's really a lot that goes into that. You need to pick the correct jurisdiction. You need to know the rates and the rules for the product or service within that jurisdiction. You need to know if the customer's tax exempt or not and be able to prove it. And then you need to aggregate all the sales and purchase information to process, create, and then submit the tax return on time. It even gets more complex if you have international operations and you have to deal with things like value-added tax, excise fees, import duties, and landed cost, as well as the national level returns. But for today, let's just focus on the domestic issues. Now, if you're not using an automated service, I can probably guess at what you're doing. First, you have to create the customer record and assign a tax jurisdiction to that record. Well, that means that somewhere in your system, you're maintaining a table of rates, combining appropriate rates into the schedule, and then assigning that schedule to the customer. That rate schedule is typically managed via zip codes, which are only going to be accurate, well, it's proven maybe 70-75% of the time. So you do all of that work, and then you run over into the inventory module, and you have to build tax-exempt rules or special rates for specific items in specific jurisdictions. So there's a lot that goes into building a tax engine within your ERP. It's time-consuming, it's research-bound, and it gets out of date pretty quickly. Our value prop is that we take all of that off your desk. You'll have one tax code. It's AvaTax. We handle the rest. You never have to worry about jurisdictional boundaries, rate changes, or legislative changes to the rules. And if you're using Cert Capture, which we'll talk about in a little bit, we manage the tax-exempt certificates for you. So the first question you really need to ask is, where do you have the obligation to collect the tax in the first place? And that speaks to a concept called Nexus, which is basically a concept that any state under their laws can declare that you have enough of a business presence in their state that they can force you to become a tax collector for them. It gets complex because each state has its own definition. Generally, they're going to look at if you have employees in the state, where your facilities are located, the type of product that you sell, whether you have rented or leased equipment within their state, and in some cases, revenue, or the number of sales and the types of activities in the states. Activities like sales visits, training calls, trade shows, all of these combine at each of the different states to create Nexus for you, or the obligation to collect taxes. That's complex in itself, and we can help you out with that. Now, our customers want to be compliant, and they want to be audit ready. So all you really want to do, though, is grow your business. But with growth comes complexity and more and bigger compliance challenges. You know, as you grow, by definition, your systems are going to grow with you. They're going to become more complex. You'll have more tax rates, more rules, more changes to track every year. Because there are more states and jurisdictions that you're collecting the taxes in, your return preparation tasks get larger. Yeah, according to a recent Wakefield study, the average small and mid-sized business spends $63,000 annually on manual processes, and the average audit cost is $114,000 on top of that. Now, all you want to do is achieve compliance, cut costs, increase efficiency, and find ways to grow your business. But the tax landscape, it's incredibly huge. There's over 152 million addresses that fall into multiple jurisdictions, of which there are over 12,000 of those. And each of those jurisdictions has the ability to create their own rules and, in most cases, their own rates. And there's tens of thousands of rates, millions of product exemptions, hundreds of thousands of buyers and seller exemptions, and thousands of changes to all of that annually. Just trying to keep your database up to date is a full-time job. And the number of jurisdictions, immense, 12,000 of them. Each one of them can create their own rules. This map you're looking at, every different color is an individual sales tax jurisdiction. In many cases, the taxability laws are changing. So it's essential for a seller to know what's taxable in each jurisdiction. That helps you prevent exposure and liability under audit. Product taxability laws themselves are not consistent across state lines, so what might be taxable in one state could be exempt in another. There's a couple of examples that I put up on the screen there about, some taxability exemptions. What I like to point out is, that original Milky Way bar, it's generally non-taxable because it contains flour. But the Milky Way Midnight Bar generally is taxable because it doesn't. Now, that's not true in Washington and some other states, but in most it is. A Nestle's Crunch Bar is going to be taxable, but a Kit Kat or a Twix contains milk. So they're going to be considered food or tax exempt. If you're in the software or hardware business, you're selling digital goods or services, medical devices, clothing, school-related products or dietary supplements, you've got huge taxability issues. Just to give you one example from where I am, I'm in the Pennsylvania area. I know if I buy a suit in Pennsylvania, it's going to be a taxable event. But if I go over to Jersey, it's tax exempt. If I buy that same suit in Manhattan, the first $110 is taxable and the rest of it is tax exempt. But in Massachusetts, the same suit is just about different. I think I might have the thresholds wrong. I think it's $90 in Massachusetts is tax exempt, and then the rest is taxable. It's just amazingly complex, and we take all of that off your desk because that's what we do. We build all of those rules into our engine. Now, what makes it complex is that the states are relying on sales tax revenue pretty heavily. Many have been operating in the red for years, and they're getting more aggressive in writing new tax laws, exemption laws, Nexus laws. But the pie is huge. 47% of all state revenue comes from sales and use tax, so it's real important to them. Last year, there was over $23 billion in uncollected taxes across all the states. Over $4 billion in California alone, and they don't want to, they can't afford to miss any of that revenue. So manufacturers and distributors have to determine what qualifies for exemptions for things that they sell, things that they buy for internal use in the process, and what's remitted back to the states. Excuse me. Now, I've heard a lot of misconceptions over the years, and I just wanted to talk about just a couple of them. One of the questions that I get all the time is, if we purchase something for the manufacturing process, it's going to be tax exempt, right? That answer to that question really depends on the item's usage. There's basically two tests that a state can determine you need to use. The predominant test says 51% of the item must be used in the manufacturing process. The exclusive test says that anything less than 100% means it doesn't qualify. So you've got those two things to deal with, as well as the state rules. Some states have, like California, have real narrow rules for partial exemptions, and other states like Texas have pretty broad rules for full exemptions. Give you an idea of an exemption based on usage. Let's talk about New York. It's a state that I've been close to and working for the last dozen years. Tools and equipment that are purchased in the manufacturing process in New York, you must use the predominant test. But utilities must meet the exclusive test, 100% for the manufacturing. Now the state, New York, allows you to pay for the energy study to validate what percentage of the utilities are allocated to manufacturing. But that only applies at the state level. So if you're in the city of New York or one of the 5 boroughs, doesn't apply. It's up to you to pay for that test. Another thing I hear quite often is if I use something as sales samples or demo equipment, that's not going to be taxable, is it? Well, if it's taken out of inventory, it will create a tax liability because effectively they're saying you bought that product to help you sell it. So it's something that you're consuming internally, and it would be a taxable event. Also, putting inventory out in a remote sales staff like that can create Nexus if they carry those samples into some states. So you've got to be little careful. And if you're using product for Q&A or QA and R&D, both of those are going to create a tax liability just about everywhere. So a lot of times I'll hear that, we sell everything B2B, so it's going to be tax exempt, right? Well, no, not always. One thing you need to think about is drop shipments. A company called IPT publishes and sells a study every 2 years that asks all the states 10 questions about drop shipment rules for their state. Some of the things that you need to consider if you're going to do drop shipments, first you have to register in that state to collect the sales tax, and then do you need to register in the state where you're actually doing the drop shipment to? And will those states accept a drop shipment certificate? So again, it gets real complex. There's a lot we can do to help you. There's a lot of research required if you're going to do it yourself. Okay, so we don't drop ship, then we're good, right? Again, not quite so easy. Some states have their own exemption rules. Hawaii, for instance, has a 0.5% wholesale distribution tax even if the product is exempt. And Washington State has a B&O tax on every item in lieu of an income tax. It gets another level when you're dealing with that B&O tax in Washington. If the item is subject to sales tax, then you can pass on the B&O tax to your customers. But if the item is tax exempt or not subject to sales tax, you're not able to pass on the cost. So in that case, if you don't calculate what it's going to be and build it into your margin, you're going to lose profit. The other thing that comes up quite often when we're doing this is a lot of companies will use 1099s to sell and service their products, and that's probably going to expand Nexus in most states also. So talked about a lot of issues. What's the risk and the impact? Well, there's really 4 risks that you need to consider if you get the sales tax wrong. One thing you can do is overpay taxes at times where your suppliers could have used your exemption certificate, and probably underpaid taxes when the vendors didn't charge the correct tax. We see that quite often. A third risk is that you can undercharge tax to your buyers, but you're still responsible to submit the correct amount to the state at the end of the month or quarter. So if you undercharge your customers and then you have to submit more tax, that's going to decrease your net profit. And if you overcharge your customers, well, you run the risk of creating negative customer sat, and in that case, you must remit to the states the full amount of money you've collected. There's a whole industry in place to help with a reverse automation, or reverse audit rather, but it's a lot cheaper just to automate and get it right on the front end. So to summarize, there's a couple of things you need to consider. First, you need to show why you didn't collect taxes and be able to prove that that's the right thing to do. You also need to be concerned with the taxability of individual products in various states. Now, without having sales and use tax experts interpreting laws for every state and locality, as well as a sophisticated tax decision-making system, it's going to be very difficult to ensure that all transactions are properly taxed. The more you can automate the tax decision with respect to both sales and purchases, the more you can minimize or perhaps eliminate tax exposure. And if you're going to start selling through a direct sales team or a web store, having a reliable tax engine is critical. And then you still have to do the sales tax returns at the end of the period. This kind of tax burden is true for almost anyone who's part of the supply chain. If something's being produced, refined, stored, or transported to a seller or an end customer, it's going to come with a world of tax complexity. So how do we help? By outsourcing the sales and use tax process, you'll achieve compliance, you'll cut costs, you'll increase efficiencies, and you'll be able to focus on more strategic initiatives that are important to your business. Avatax sits in the cloud. It sits between your order entry system, your web store, or your billing systems, and the government. And in less than a third of a second, your systems will have an accurate tax calculation for hundreds of thousands of products across all 12,000 jurisdictions, taking also into account the tax status of your buyer. All you do is set it and forget it. Now, Cert's Capture is an exemption certificate management service. It manages, stores, and organizes your customers' tax-exempt certificates. It has a built-in communication system to communicate with your customers when change or updates are needed. That means you no longer have to keep the documents in a folder or a filing cabinet somewhere or scan them into some other system or just store PDFs out on your disk. When the auditor comes around, you can comply with their request with just the touch of a mouse. And at month end, we prepare and submit the tax returns as well as provide treasury services to ensure the returns are submitted and paid accurately and on time. Now, we also offer a number of different professional services. These are, basically it's tax-based expertise deployed when you need it and how you need it. We can do audit defense, Nexus studies, product taxability studies, and other projects. So you have a partner combined with a calculation tool that can provide support to your specific situation. Effectively, you wind up with your own dog in the fight. Now, let's be honest. Sales tax is a compulsory activity. It doesn't put 10 cents on your bottom line or drive growth. It's a mandated activity. You have to do it, and you're already spending thousands of dollars annually just trying to be compliant. So the question that folks ask me is why have you been so successful in the Sage customer channel? Well, the bottom line, manual sales tax management is time-consuming and it's expensive. Aberdeen Research put the cost of tax compliance for mid-sized companies at $67,000 a year. That's basically 4 people spending almost 1,300 hours per year on sales and use tax-related tasks. Now, we have almost 20,000 customers from mom and pops to Fortune 500s. The average ROI for those customers, little over 5 months. That's 5 months until you've covered the cost of the system that's going to free up time and money that you're already spending so you can focus on business development, all while ensuring compliance. We do this because we're a consumption-based service, and essentially you only pay for what you use. Now, there's a lot of risks that the Sage customers have to deal with. What strikes me on this slide is in New York, there's almost 2,000 auditors. 75% of them focus on out-of-state business, and Florida has 600 auditors. 150 of those are out of state, and last year Florida did 2,700 out-of-state audits. In fact, there's 3 times as many businesses get audited annually for sales tax than the IRS audits for income tax. And that's why the 20,000 customers and an additional 500 more every month choose to eliminate the risk by outsourcing to us. Now, one other reason that we've been successful in the Sage environment is nobody really wants to do the job of sales taxes. Do you? I mean, most of the tax return accountants I speak with that are employed by manufacturers or distributors readily admit to being at that desk simply to get promoted into another position or to find another position in a different company. So you wind up training people to do a job that's not their long-term career commitment, and then you're going to retain their replacement. And you can go out on LinkedIn. There's tons of unfilled accounting jobs with words like sales tax in the description. So I've found that there are many triggering events that cause companies to rethink their tax strategy, and some of them are listed here. The question really is, how much time and money can you reallocate to business development? Well, the recent Wakefield research study puts it in an average of 11 hours per week, plus the salary for that time, at almost $100,000 a year. That's a lot of time and money in 1 year that you could be using to grow your business. So before I jump over into the software, let's talk just little bit about us. We're a 13-year-old company, and as Danica had mentioned, I've been with the company as a founding employee since 2004. We're approaching 20,000 customers now, but the important stat, I think, on this slide is that better than 98% of our customers renew the service every year. That's how happy they are, and that's a stat that we focus on maintaining. This year we'll do over 6 billion individual tax calculations. We manage millions of exemption certificates. We'll file 25 billion in returns this year. And we've grown in the 13 years from 15 employees to about 14,000 this year on 4 different continents. And we've been with Sage for over 10 years now. So with that, let me escape out of the PowerPoint and jump back over into the software. So what you're looking at now is the landing page of the AvoTax console. Most of the work that you do in AvoTax actually is going to be done within your Sage system, setting up your customer, attaching the customer to the AvoTax console, and then you just work with Sage the way that you always do. There won't be any changes. The only thing you'll see is that instead of calculating the tax on your server, a call goes out over the internet. It's all encrypted. We get it in the cloud, calculate the tax, and get it back to the Sage system within a third of a second or less. So, but during your setup and during your month-end closing processes and things, you're going to come into the AvoTax console, and that's what you're looking at here. On the you won't spend a lot of time on the landing page, but let me point out a couple of things. We will always tell you when the next maintenance update is and what's being changed for that maintenance. Now, we never have to take the system offline for updates or maintenance. We generally do them late in the night on a Saturday night at 1 to 3 o'clock in the morning East Coast time, the last Saturday night of the month, and we're always updating for next month or in the future. So even if you have a customer on your web store or, God forbid, you're sitting there on Saturday night entering in orders, you're going to get a very accurate and current tax calculation. Avalara University is where all the training is located, and we do an awful lot of webinar-based training, similar to what you're looking at right now, as well as some video-based training. You can go in there at any time. We'll train every person in your company that you want to have access to the Avalara system. The knowledge base and users guide are available. You can submit a tech support case directly to the tech support department if you want, or you could open up a chat session with them, or you could pick up the phone and call them on the 800 line. Now, on every screen, you're going to have access to the Avalara Customer Center, which is our community for customer communications back and forth to the company, to your regional sales managers, and within our customer base, you can ask questions, things like that. And then the help center is available to you at any time. We'll always give you some alerts as necessary, and if you're using the exemption certificate system, anything you need to know, that'll be posted. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do when you set up your account is to run over to the Settings tab. I just pressed on the wrong one. So let me go over to the Settings tab. In here, you'll want to set up your AvoTax users. These are people who can log onto the console and gain access to the system. Now, it's a roles-based user system. It's a multi-company based system. You can set it up so that any individual user can be an administrative user at the corporate level or at each company level. An administrative user has full rights to the database within the companies that they're assigned. The day-to-day users have read-write access, so they can go in and look at transactions, they can look at the Nexus setup, things like that, run reports, but they're not able to make any changes to the database. There's no limit to the number of users. There's no seat licenses or extra fees that we charge. If you need somebody to look at the system, you just create a user account for them. There's a couple of basic tax calculators built into the system that are pretty nice for the customer-facing group. The basic tax calculator simply looks at the street address that you're shipping to, where you're shipping from, and how much a sale might be, and it'll come back with a full breakout of the tax rates for that jurisdiction. The advanced calculator does the same thing, but it does it at the line item level, and it takes advantage of all of the tax rules that you've set up in your organization. And that's where you're going to spend most of your time getting the system set up in the organization tab. Now you can see Avatax is a multi-company system. You can set up as many companies as you need. The companies can be holding companies, parent companies. We can do child-parent relationships. We can do divisional level reporting within that. So you'll set up a number of different companies, and to set up the company is pretty straightforward. I mean, what we're going to ask is the address of the company, a main contact in case we need to get in touch with somebody, some other easy questions like that. How do you want to handle freight? How do you want to do tax rounding? Those kinds of questions. So this is where you really begin to implement your tax policy within your Avatax system. You'll want to go over and concede Nexus in the various states. Now, when you look at Nexus, there's a number of things to think about. First, Avatax is a multi-country system. International system is probably a better way to put that. When you first buy the system, you'll have the United States and you'll have Canada. But we support every country that's recognized by the United Nations, as well as about 20 more. So in this case, you'll check off the United States, you'll go into the select jurisdiction section, and from there, you'll start checking off the different states where you want Avatax to calculate the sales tax. And you'll have content for every state and every province in Canada, all the territories, the islands, the jurisdictions. So, I mean, if you hire somebody in America's Samoa and need to start charging the sales tax out there, or Guam, that's already built in for you. All you need to do is tell us that you want to collect the tax in those states. Now, in some states will give you options at the local level on how you want to handle things. So like, for instance, in California, you can say, you know, I have Nexus in the city of Arcata, but not the city of Antioch. So what I want Avatax to do is calculate the state tax and all the compulsory state-level jurisdictions, as well as Arcata. But if my customer lives, if I'm shipping into Antioch, let's let the customer handle the use tax for the local jurisdiction. So this can get as deep as you need it to be. Couple of things make it easy. Most of my customers take the very conservative approach, and they'll say, let's choose all of the jurisdictions. Now, that has some ramifications at the end of the month when you have to do the sales tax returns. But it is a very conservative approach that's going to keep your company out of trouble, as well as all of your customers should they forget to self-assess. Or you could go in and selectively choose which ones you want. So the important thing really there is set up your company, select your Nexus. You'll want to establish locations for warehouses, remote salespeople, sales offices, things like that, anywhere where you're going to ship from. Not required. We'll set up the corporate address for you, but if you want to build multiple locations, you certainly can. You'll want to go ahead and set up your items. Now, the easy way to do this really is to build it is to either build it within Sage or build it within a spreadsheet and then import it. And what we're going to look for if you do import is your product code or your SKU code, your description, and then an Avatax system tax code. Now, we manage probably about 2,000 different Avatax system tax codes. This is the most important part of your setup because it is behind that tax code that we're going to know the tax rules for that type of product in all 12,000 jurisdictions. So we're going to know that under this particular tax code, for example, if you sell fur clothing into Pennsylvania, it's going to be taxable. But if you sell fur-lined gloves, I think it's Minnesota, it's going to be a tax-exempt sale. So you're going to want to make sure that you get all of your product SKU codes managed and mapped to a system tax code. We'll help you out with that. There's a pretty good-sized spreadsheet that describes all the system tax codes, what they mean, and if you need to drill in to kind of figure out the specifics at the state or the local level, we can help you out with that through the technical support group. If you've gotten a letter ruling from a state, well, let me start over. Avatax always takes a very conservative approach to tax calculations. We're going to, if there's a gray area, which heaven knows there's going to be gray areas all over the sales tax industry, we're going to take the most conservative approach to it. If you disagree with that approach, or maybe you've gotten a letter ruling from a state that allows you to take a less conservative approach, you can build your own custom tax rules, well, your own codes and tax rules for specific items, even in specific jurisdictions if necessary. So it's pretty straightforward. But the point is that the system is flexible enough to allow you to implement the tax policy that you're already working with. And as your company expands and your needs become more complex, Avatax will scale up with you so that we'll be able to help you manage those tax policies over time. There's also a rudimentary tax-exempt certificate management system built into the service that basically says, for this customer, in these states during this range of dates, consider them to be tax exempt. And you can import those customers or set them up if you want. The Cert's capture service, which is our higher end cloud-based system, does all of that, integrates with Avatax, and manages the certificate image online. So if you need to go out real quickly during, say, the order entry process, just to confirm that you have a valid tax certificate, you're able to do that. So that's your setup screen. We find that on average, most of our customers are set up and running typically 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks on average. It's not a implementations time that we manage in quarters or years, as you know, in some cases. It's typically going to be a matter of weeks or months before you're up live and running. Now, I've gone over to the transaction screen. This is a good screen where your customer-facing people might want to have access to some of this data. Okay? On this screen, you can call up sales, purchases, returns, any kind of transaction that's necessary. You can call it up by customer or vendor code or even the document code for any range of dates in any state or province. Now, excuse me for just a moment, please. Now, on this screen, what you're looking at is going to be the number, the invoice number in this case, the customer code, if it's a sales or purchase invoice, what the date was, what the tax was, whether it's committed or not, it might still be a transaction in process. Now, I've prepared a pretty complex transaction to take a look at. If you get a call from a customer questioning the tax jurisdiction on any transaction, your customer account people will be able to come into this screen and call up the specific transaction. They can see the date. They can see where it was, you know, what type of transaction it is. In this case, the purchase order was saved. It came in over the internet, which is kind of interesting. We've got, in this case, a distributor or a manufacturer who is shipping through a web-based order entry system. It'll tell them, you know, what the total amount was, how much was taxable, how much was tax exempt, and the tax amount. Now, looking at all the line items, what we have here is 3 different products, prescription glasses, non-prescription glasses, and sunglasses that were shipped to 2 different locations, one location in New York, one location in Colorado. You can see the tax code that they were mapped with. In this case, we used all the destination-based rules because it's interstate commerce. And we'll be able to see for each line item how much the line item was, what was taxable or non-taxable. And I thought this was interesting because the prescription glasses in New York are non-taxable, right? As are the prescription glasses in Colorado. Okay. You can see that in New York, you're dealing with a state and a county tax. In Colorado, you have the same state and county, well, different, but you have a state and a county tax. You also have two special tax districts, a scientific and cultural district and the transit district. Now, in New York, the non-prescription glasses are taxable. Okay, down in Colorado, the non-prescription glasses are non-taxable, and the sunglasses are taxable in both places. Avitax calculate all of this at the line item level, produces an invoice to send back to corporate. In this case, we were selling to one company and shipping to a couple of different locations, and did it all in about a third of a second. So I thought that was kind of a neat transaction to show you. And if you need to prove any of this, or if you've got something, the customer asked for some sort of statement, you could use the print button up at the top of that screen and take it right out to a PDF, where then you could just email it to the customer, and it'll give you the breakdown for each line item: what was taxable, how much was tax exempt, whether tax was included or not. Make sense? So we've got that built into the system. Let me tell it I'm done. Couple of things that I wanted to point out. This service is going to save you a lot of time every month. Let me run over to the Reports tab and show you just some of the types of reports that you can get out of Avitax on a monthly basis. So built in, there are sales tax reports and consumer use tax reports. Most of you, I suspect, won't use the reverse charge. That's going to be for value-added taxes overseas. The excise reports have to do with medical equipment under the Affordable Care Act. You can export any data element you need to a spreadsheet and use it in any other decision management system. And there's a transaction usage report. So within the sales and use tax reports, you've got reconciliation reports, you've got tax reports, export and worksheet reports. Let me go into the tax return reports because I wanted to show you pretty much just very quickly how the service works. I'm going to pick the use tax jurisdiction detail report. Now, all our reports are designed to start at the highest level and then allow you to drill your way down through. So you can run the report for all states or for any one state. I'll pick it out for Colorado. Can do it for any range of dates. And in many cases, you can choose the type of information you want displayed on the report itself. There's a half a dozen different ways to slice, dice, and display the data. And all of our reports can go to HTML, Excel, or PDF. So I'm going to generate a report for the state of Colorado for all my taxable transactions for last month that I'll use to fill out my state and local tax returns. Now, in this particular report, I've got it split out by Colorado. So there are 4 different state tax types, because there were a couple of different counties and then some special jurisdictions. In each case, we're going to tell you what the assigned code is because you've asked us to. We're going to tell you what the sales, what was exempt, what was non-taxable, what the total taxable sales were, the tax rate, and the tax amount for that particular jurisdiction. Now, in this case, there were 4 invoices to the state of Colorado last month. So I drilled down into invoice 9364. There were 2 line items. I can see that one of them was for digital product and one was freight. I can see what the tax amount was for each. And if I needed to drill back to the source document, I could do so from here. So all of the reports are designed to operate in much the same way, allowing you to start at the highest summary level and then drill down as necessary. Now, one of the other services that we offer at the end of the month is sales tax return preparation and submittal. So I just wanted to point this screen out to you. For those customers that take advantage of our return service, and it's probably about, I don't know, 65% of our customers now take advantage of this service. You would use this screen prior to us submitting the sales tax returns for you to verify that all the data is correct. Okay? So if I go into, say, Colorado, I can see that I've got, $4,041 worth of sales. I can see what the tax liability is, what the use tax liability is. Now, I haven't completely set it up, so I get a couple of error messages. You won't get these on your system. But from here, you could drill down into any of the jurisdictions and look at the tax liability for the month or the period. If there's a use tax a liability for the month or the period, you can go in to see that, and then you can go in and make adjusting entries as necessary. What we're going to ask you to do monthly is review these numbers and click Approved. When you click Approved, down at the bottom of the page, you'll see what your total tax liability is for that period. So we're going to ask you to transfer funds into a bonded holding account that we'll set up with you, your bank, so that we can go in. We'll withdraw the $19,033 funds to cover your tax liability. We'll prepare all your tax returns. We'll submit them to the state in any manner they want us to, and then we'll do the treasury transfers to make sure that the states get the return on time and they get paid on time and it's accurate. Now, your filing, your returns archive is all available under a separate tab. If there are any tax notices that you've received that we need to research for you, you can go right into the tax notices tab and see the status of the case and who's working on it and what's going on. And then we're going to ask you to tell us during setup what states you want us to do the tax returns in and when it's due. And that is pretty much, I believe, the presentation that I'd prepared for you today. So what you really have here is a simple, elegant, and very easy to use service. Since day one, we've worked to make AvaTax the fastest, easiest, most accurate, affordable, and reliable way to do transactional taxes, so you don't have to spend time on compulsory, non-profitable tasks. You're going to be able to focus on the more strategic issues to help drive growth in your business. So with that, let's jump back to the PowerPoint real quickly. Danica, were there any questions that came up or anything that I could address at this point?
Let me unmute the lines, and anyone can feel free to ask a question. What is the pricing model for this kind of solution?
That's a great question. The service, I think I kind of alluded to it earlier on, but the service is priced based on consumption. So what you'll do is figure out how many invoices you have during the course of the year. In the states where you have Tax Nexus, we'll put you into a service tier. Could be, 1 to 50 transactions or, $1 million to $1.5 million. Each tier has its own price. What you'll find is we tried to make it so that it was affordable for all size companies. And the more you use, the less it's going to wind up costing you per transaction. And these are annual service contracts.
Okay, I see one more question. Can the Cert capture be used in my web store for new customers?
Oh, that's another good question. Yes, absolutely. In fact, we can provide code for your developers to put into the web store. Many of our customers already do this where, say they're a manufacturer and they want their resellers, their partners, to place their orders through the web store. Well, quite often, and AvaTax works real well that way. That just happens automatically because you have the tax-exempt customers set up in the AvaTax console. But what happens if a new customer comes onto the website and they want to be considered tax-exempt and they can provide all the documentation? Well, we can provide code for you to include on your website so that they would just check a box that says I'm tax-exempt, and it would immediately run them out to the AvaTax Certs Capture collection wizard, basically. we stay within your website, so we're not moving them out to another website, but we'll run them through a wizard, asking them, 6 or 8 questions, whatever's necessary. We'll produce the tax-exempt certificate on the screen for them to review, ask them to make sure that it's correct, and then they sign it with a mouse. That certificate gets moved back into Avatax, and at that point, you as the customer, our client, has 2 options. You can either say, yeah, we're going to accept every certificate we get, or more likely you're going to put it into a holding file so that it gets reviewed first and then you accept it. We manage the certificate image in the cloud, but what the customer sees is they go right directly back into the shopping experience. They're going to fill up their shopping cart, and Avatax is going to create a temporary or a non-committed shipment order for them that'll show as tax exempt. And then the next day, your tax exempt people come in, they'll review it, they'll accept it, and then post the transaction through Avatax. And all that can happen automatically while the customer's in the website without ever leaving your own website. It's pretty slick.
Great. One last call. Are there any other questions?
I don't think so.
Okay, so just to remind you, Gia Lane on the East Coast and Mike Scher on the West Coast are your Sage Sales Account reps. I will also be following up with a link to a white paper, sales tax quality process for the manufacturer and distributor if you are interested in downloading that. And the webinar replay will be available on our YouTube site within 48 hours. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Tom, for a great presentation, and we look forward to being in touch with you all soon.
Thanks, Danica. I look forward to working with everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.